Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Goldberg. I'm the Cloud Practice Manager here at CCSI. Welcome to our Cybersecurity Framework 101 presentation. So today's speakers are myself, I'm Joe Goldberg, the Cloud Practice Manager at CCSI, and Matt Pascucci, who's our Cybersecurity Practice Manager. And today we'll be talking about two of the most popular cybersecurity frameworks, the NIST CSF and the CIS Controls. But first, I just want to tell you guys a couple of quick bits about CCSI. CCSI has been in business for 40 years. We provide infrastructure and data center services like networking, routing, switching, and hyperconverged. We do third-party maintenance, which gives you priority response, break fix, and CCSI Net, which is like a much improved version of SmartNet, and of course cloud services, which I'm very proud of. Includes containers, Kubernetes, microservices, SD-WAN, Office 365, and migrations to clouds such as AWS, Azure, and Google, and cybersecurity and physical security, which is ransomware, DDoS assessments, security and vulnerability assessments, threat protect, door locks, and IP surveillance. And we have a full 24/7 NOC and SOC. And our NOC is SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. And we offer all kinds of managed services out of the NOC and SOC, like log management, SIM, endpoint, all sorts of monitoring services. And we have custom SLAs that we can make with individual customers. So now I'm going to turn it over to Matt Pascucci, who is our Cybersecurity Practice Manager, and he is going to tell you everything you need to know about NIST and the CIS controls. Take it away, Matt.
Hey, guys. So a couple things that we have going on here is we're going to go over the CIS controls. We're going to go over the NIST controls, how they work. Joe quickly went over all the things that we have here from a data infrastructure and data center to third-party maintenance to cloud, cybersecurity, NOC and SOC. All those things are there. We kind of wrap our services around these controls. So as we go through this, we'll kind of get that a little bit more into the presentation. But let's just really kind of get down to the meat and potatoes of this thing here. So I'm sorry, seems like WebEx is getting a little bit overloaded here, so we might have like a 20 or 30-second gap in between the transition of slides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to prepare a little bit and kind of move the slides over as we go through. But before we get started, what we're looking to accomplish today is we're looking to accomplish what these controls are, what the programs are, what the difference between a control and a program is. The regulations today are heavily based on the CIS and the NIST controls and their frameworks. So what we look to do right now is just get a better understanding of kind of what they are, how we can apply them, and still just kind of keep on moving. So as we have here, we're going to get this. This is going to be the first of three presentations that we're doing. This is going to be 102, and 103 is going to come 2 weeks after. They're going to help with understanding where the risk is in your organization, going over a few other common frameworks, and really just get the understanding of the regulatory thing. So that's what we're going to do here. One second here, we're lagging just a bit. Okay, I'm going to keep on moving forward here. So what we're going to do is we're going to have any questions that you guys have, put them in the chat box. We're going to go over any if we have them. If we go long for whatever reason here, I will personally make sure that you have those questions directly answered. Any type of diagrams that we use throughout this presentation will be delivered to you. As I said, this is based off of the CIS controls, based off the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And what we're going to do is we're going to be just kind of using their guidance. They have unbelievable material. It's great. So from that being said, any questions, put in the chat box. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. If we don't get to your question at the end of the presentation, I will personally make sure that we have it responded to. So we'll go from there. So with that, controls versus programs. This is extremely subtle difference to this, but it's very important to understand. So you have controls and you have a program. The difference between them is subtle, but it's very, if you don't understand that right now, we're going to see how they kind of interplay with each other. So a control framework is the CIS controls. You see CIS, they're all over the place. Another example is the NIST 853. They are very granular, they are very technical, and they get in the weeds, right? So you have like, this is how you were to go about hardening a Windows or Linux or Cisco firewall, like the down and the dirty. How are we going to actually make sure that they're secure? That is a control, and there's frameworks wrapped around that. You can look at the NIST controls and the CIS controls, how they recommend doing that and move it forward. So it's a much deeper dive into security, into the actual hands-on keyboards. What should we be doing? It touches all aspects of your security program. So you have everything there. It breaks it down. But with all those controls, like if you look at the NIST 853, it's like 90 pages long, right? So where do you even start with all that stuff? All the technical data, which is wonderful to have because you need that to get down into the weeds. But where do you start? So those are the foundational, overarching. This is everything that's there. You can go and you can take the CIS controls. You can take the NIST 853. You can line them up on your desk and be like, I don't even know where to look, right? I don't even know what is a priority to me. What am I doing? That's what the program is. The program is a structured, more of a strategic, simplifying the communication and the direction for you as an organization to say, okay, this is where I need to focus. And we'll see that with the CIS controls, and we'll see that with the NIST CSF controls, programs, on where you should really be focusing your security practice, how you're going to go out there and measure yourself, and what to do to make these things more important. So as we move through this, we're going to start seeing, there are particular areas that you as an organization need to focus on. And a lot of that is based off of your risk assessment, your gap analysis, how you're working with, and then what to do, right? So these particular, controls and these frameworks, these help you customize your security posture, your program. So you don't have to stick to just the NIST CSF and the CIS controls for the control framework. You could be doing a whole bunch of other things. You could say, hey, I'm really guided towards PCI, NYDFS, I'm HIPAA, like the areas that are really guiding your security from a regulatory standpoint. That could be a very large part of your program. It doesn't have to be the whole program, but that could be a very good strategic guiding force towards where you want to start envisioning things going. So with that, we have multiple different things. So I'm transitioning the slides here. Hopefully WebEx gets the delay moving, but we have almost a step-by-step way of going out there and understanding where you have to be. So from that, we want to always start with the control framework. That is the nitty-gritty. You could just use that and try to fix things in there, but without anything on top of that, the program frameworks or the risk frameworks, you're really ad hocing it, right? It's not a bad place to start, but it's a bad place to stay. You need to have more than just the control framework. It's wonderful to have that in place. You need to have it in place, but you need to work yourself up towards a risk framework. That is the strategic, more experienced, mature progression of your security program, how it's going to be moving. So everything is based off of risk. When you start at the control frameworks, you start at technically where do you want to be, and then you build your roadmap, understanding I have these controls, these are important to me. I understand my industry. I'm going to identify with where I need to really focus these controls or particular subsets and subcategories of these controls. And then you start building your program around that. Once you have that kind of in the groundwork laid, you get more towards the risk framework. So you have like NIST 839 or ISO 27005. Like these are frameworks built on how to accept risk. What is your risk appetite as an organization? That's a little bit outside what we're going to speak about today, but that is the next progression based off the program framework, which is now with the groundwork laid with the control framework. So you can see how it's like we have the nitty-gritty towards the direction, towards how am I now going to go out there and accept risk, understand it, and view it. There are certain times where certain things might be high to you, but low to other people. You have to get that business alignment in place, the strategy, where you're going as an organization, and then applying that risk appetite towards the incidents that come out of your program framework, which are directed with your controls. So you can see there's a progression here, and there's a maturity model, and that comes with experience. So with that framework, we need to find one that fits. So we're switching slides now. That is now something that needs to be unique for you, right? Every single organization out there in the world, all of them, they have a unique mission, they have separate business objectives, and they have a risk tolerance. That is all different, right? So you might have competitors, you might be in banking, and you might have a very similar mission, business objective, and risk tolerance, but it's not this exact same. It's not going to be mirrored. There's going to be things that are going to be in your framework from a control and program perspective that are going to be different from your competitors or different from other organizations. These are all unique towards you. You might all have different strategies for your business. Where are you going in 6, 9, 12 months from now? Maybe 2 years from now, 24 months out. That is going to affect your program, and it's going to affect the controls that now have to be inlaid based off of your mission. So your industry as well. We spoke a little bit about this before. So if you're going to be HIPAA, if you're going to be, you have to follow the SEC guidelines. If you have to go out and now do anything for PCI, that is guiding your controls, and it's also guiding your program. So you might have to now adjust how you protect credit cards more, which means you have to have logging a little bit higher. So no longer is it just a checkbox that yes, you log, your program is going to guide how long you log, right? So that's what happens. The program is guiding more of the ability to go out there, customize it, make sure it fits with the controls, put those in place. You have to adopt a framework. And what happens when you adopt that framework is you go through the risk assessments and you go through the gap analysis. You're not reinventing the wheel. Okay, you have the NIST controls, you have the CIS controls, you have the ISO, you have all these other frameworks and policies. What you want to do is take those and massage them to how it fits for you. Okay, don't go out, you don't have to go and make a new one. All right, they're all there. And based off the regulations that you guys might have to follow if you're regulated, they're all based off of NIST or CIS in some way, shape, or form. So if you're following their best practices, it's very likely that your compliance is just going to follow right behind it because you're already doing a good job there. So find out what your current state is, understand where I am. That's where you get this risk assessment, gap analysis kind of in play based off your industry. And then you can supplement additional controls as needed. You might be, HIPAA compliant, but you saw some stuff that you've worked with PCI that was just very helpful, and you adopt those as controls. You put them underneath your program. So these frameworks help prevent more of a haphazard approach into going out there and just kind of winging it and being like, hey, we're just doing security. I'm not really sure how. And when we get to the NIST CSF part of it, they have something called implementation tiers in it, showing, how do you adapt to it? And there's certain ways that you adapt. But based off of that, not all controls will fit in your framework. You might go in there and saying, hey, I got the top 20, the CIS controls. Also, we call them top 20. SANS has been great with that. And you might have one for wireless per se, and you're like, well, my organization doesn't use wireless. We're all hardwired in, so I don't need that. You still need to put it in your framework. And you need to go in there and you have to document the business controls and the reasoning why you don't have it. Just because one day you're going to come in there and you're going to look through your framework and you're going to be like, okay, I'm adding this in there now. We didn't have it because of XYZ, or if you're getting audited, it's still a good way of showing it's part of my program, but at the current time, it's not in use. So even if you don't have those controls, still document that they're there, but they're not in use. So the combination of these industry frameworks and these standards and these controls, they help reduce the gaps of your knowledge. They help reduce the gaps of where you're going strategically, and they help you just get that more of that focused vision of, hey, these are areas I need to know about. Even if I'm not doing them, I'm still going to document that I'm not doing them because it's part of my program, and that control is just no longer there. But I'm just going to say, to be determined, or will be happening shortly, or whatever. Put something in there because it's going to help you show to others, maybe even your board or whoever, that we have something, we are envisioning this coming down the line eventually, and they will be doing X, Y, and Z if this was to occur. It helps you be more strategic. So those are areas that, just focus on. How do your controls guide towards your program? And your program is now moving around based off your industry, based off your standards, based off your business alignment. So with that being said, we flipped over to now the Center for Internet Security. So CIS controls, huge, super fan of these guys. I'm going to be very honest with you. They're awesome. I've worked in many organizations in the past, and we have used this as a way of being able to really understand our gaps. where are we going? What are we doing? They've actually turned, they're heavily for controls. They actually, over their recent revision, their 7.1, they have moved into more of the ability to actually make a program out of it. And we'll go into that a little bit on how they're no longer just controls, but you can actually kind of identify yourself with a particular implementation group, which is really, really cool for those who are just trying to follow good security hygiene and practices. But they're great. Go to their website, go download all the tools that they've made. They've risk assessments. They have the SysRAM. They have, particular benchmark tools that you can get out there to say, this is how you do security. These are the main areas of doing it. So they're wonderful. Big fan of them. And, we've seen, if anyone's taken any SANS classes, the top 20, this is them. We've just transitioned now to the next slide. So hopefully WebEx is able to catch up. But what we have here is we have the ability now for us to take a quick look at the top 20 areas that the industry says are best practices for controls to defend against the common threats that we see. So here's the top 20 controls. These are beautifully broken down into 3 separate areas: basic, foundational, organizational. And what we have here is it's a consensus, essentially. It's been developed through resources, peers in the industry, businesses, tech guys, security folks. Everyone has come together and they pretty much made this consensus of this is where to build a mature program, you have to focus. These 20 areas. They're not saying you have to do these 20 areas, but these are the 20 areas that you must start looking at. As I said, I used wireless before. You might not have wireless in your organization. So it means number 15 in the foundational controls, not something you have to worry about right now, but you do document that there's nothing there, and that's why you're not doing anything, right? So from that standpoint, you see it here. It's basic, it's foundational, it's organizational. This is the newest guidance, version 7.1 that just came out. The basic ones are pretty much key controls that all companies need to have. This is something you could be, a large bank, or you could be a mom and pop shop. You need to be doing these 6. These just have to be done in order to do somewhat of basic security. Like, this is just the key controls that everyone needs to have. Like, there shouldn't be going below this. If you're going below this, you have a problem. And those are things to keep an eye on. Going back now towards foundational, these are the technical best practices when you're moving out from a maturity standpoint. So getting the email set up, because email and web protections and browser protections, those are huge. Those are major vectors of threat we're seeing right now. Malware, boundary defenses, data protection, like these are areas that as foundationally you move forward out of those basics, these are areas that you have to focus on. And then they show more of the organizational. The organizational are more on how you deal with people, process, and how it relates to more of a culture, right? You're looking at how you're doing things from incident response, how you're doing pen tests and red teams, how are you doing security awareness? Those are more about process and people. And as you start really getting into more of a focused security standpoint with the application software security. So that's more of the organization, how they go out there, more of a mature scale. So these are the top 20. We call these the general controls. But go to the website. If there's any questions about where I got this stuff, I didn't make this. This is all from CIS themselves. If you can't find them, email us. I will direct you there. I'll send you all the links. They do great stuff with, I said, the benchmarks, which are great. We use them all the time. So feel free. You can't find anything on the web that we're bringing up here that CIS has done an unbelievable job making. Reach out to us, and I will essentially just send you back their links. That's what we're doing. So yeah, feel free to do that. So we're going to transition to one of our next slides here. Those are the controls, right? So before we spoke about the difference between controls and frameworks, we said controls are granular and programs are more guiding where to look at and which controls to look at. CIS, with their version 7.1 that came out with, they started moving more towards a control, not only control only, but on more of the program type of thing. So they have something called implementation groups. Very, very cool, right? So what you do with the implementation groups, it's pretty much an introduction that came out with 7.1. These are self-assessed categories that are based on what's relevant to you, your organization, your business, how you do things, right? So if you look at implementation group 1, which they in their guidance is called IG1, so we're going to call it IG1 because implementation is a mouthful. So IG1, IG2, IG3, right? You have those 3 there. And they have kind of broken down here, but the little house, the business, and the 2 businesses there that just as you grow in an organization, these are the things that you should be seeing. These are the things that you're going to be looking at. Here's the controls we expect you to start doing. You don't have to do them, but based off of all the industry consensus of other businesses that have worked in doing their guidance, they've come to the conclusion that this is normal for a business of this size. And what that means is from an IEG 1 part, implementation group 1, limited resources, limited experience. You put yourself in that group. You have moderate resources and moderate experience. Second group, significant resources and significant experience. You're in IEG 3. So IEG 1 takes the 43 controls that are within the CIS group, and it pretty much says, these are the cyber hygiene. This is what has to happen. This is what you should be doing from just a standard PAR. I have a program. I have a small business. I don't have a lot of resources. I don't have a lot of experience. You should still be doing these particular controls. So they're helping you now take that program, because you now identified now as the implementation group 1 that that's where you should be. And now they say, going forward, which we'll go see through our next slides, focus on these controls. So you take the categories, and then you're going to say within those categories, these sub controls, these 43 sub controls for IEG 1, that's where you should be. Now IEG 2, IEG 3, they just kind of build off of each other, right? And so 2 assumes the other 43 controls plus all the ones there, and IEG 3 is pretty much everything. So it takes that and it puts those common threads in it by organization and saying, you know what? You might not know where to start yet because there's so much stuff in here. Focus here first, get here, then you get here. You can then take it up a notch and start applying and adjusting and moving on. So the next slide that we're flipping to now is an example of what it kind of looks like. And so from IEG 1, if you have said, you know what, I am a small company, I use commercial off-the-shelf home software environments, we have sensitive data is typically low, these are the areas that you can go in there and say, I am probably going to be a mixture of IEG 1 or maybe some of 2. But if you fit right in that, stick with 1. You know what, if you're number 2, you're sitting there, you're helping security teams manage sensitive client data, or you have a lot of information that's stored, maybe you're 2. If you're really, really worried about any type of zero-day targeted attacks, anything like that from a sophisticated adversary, then you're 3, pretty much do everything, okay? So that's where it's kind of taking it down a notch. Now it's no longer worrying about controls here, right? So the controls, as we said, the top 20, those are the controls, the categories, and we're going to get into the controls in a second. This is worrying about going out there and profiling yourself to say, where should I focus? This is a program. I don't think they call it in anywhere in the CIS verbiage about a program. Maybe they do, but I haven't seen it. I'm calling it that because that's what it is. You're determining based off of this type of organization or what I'm doing that I should focus on these controls, and that's what helps you build the program. And CIS, with their recent revisions, has recently come out with this, and it's a really, really helpful way, because if you're a small organization or even find yourself in implementation group 2, like, where do you focus? You have to do a gap analysis, you have to do a risk assessment, you have to understand your risk appetite. You might have a very good understanding right off the bat saying, I fit within that group, I'm going to start there, and I'm going to move forward, and I might have things that don't apply to me, so they might not be as applicable, okay? So as we come here, we're flipping over to the next slide here. This is an example, and we're going to just take the very, very first control from CIS, and here you go. Here it is, inventory and control of hardware assets. So here's some of the controls from the CIS Control 1 that we have on there. So what we have going forward right now is we have Control 1, which was in that 1 through 6 of the basic controls. This is the first one. You have the subcategories 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, all the way to 1.8. And then from there, you have the control title and the descriptions, and then the implementation groups, right? The implementation groups are now taking those controls and they're applying them towards the group. So that group is now pretty much helping you guide your program. So if you identified as 1, 2, or 3, here's where you focus on the first category of the controls. So say I am just going to be, small business, IEG 1, I am going to look at here, I'm going to look through all the controls, I'm going to look at control 1 from here, I can visually see that they're green, boom, 1.4, 1.6, I'm focusing there. I'm focusing on maintaining detailed asset inventory, and address unauthorized assets. I'm going to get my arms wrapped around that, and then I'm going to move forward. If I want to expand even more. If you said, you know what, I find I kind of fit into the second group, you focus there. If you're worried about nation states coming after you, do all the things. Go all the things. So that's kind of how we're going to fulfill this from a program standpoint of determining where you are, where you need to be, where you want to be, but understand what your current state is. It's much easier to understand currently, where am I, what control should I be doing, and then looking forward, where do I have to go? Very, very good for your budget. It's a good cyber program to start with, implementing best practices. And CIS has just done an amazing job. They're wonderful. I think I've said that like 10 times, so I'm sorry. But they can't speak highly enough for what they've done for the industry itself and how we've been able to just utilize that to secure so many other organizations, so many other people. So that is how NIST uses their controls and guides it more towards a program so that you can kind of direct and focus things through that. What we're going to chat about next is going to be a little bit more on just NIST. So what we have here with NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And what we're doing there is we are going to take their cybersecurity framework and break it down in the same way we just kind of broke down how to use the CIS controls and guiding their implementation groups for a program, how we use NIST CSF to do the very same things. Now, NIST, the CSF, relies heavily on other controls, whereas the controls where CIS pretty much comes from a control mindset and now we're kind of guiding more towards a program mindset. NIST starts with the program, and again, now it's starting to go back down towards the controls. So their controls that they rely on heavily are the NIST 853. That is their bread and butter. All the federal systems go off of that. That's something that you see in tons of frameworks, just kind of sitting there and kind of recommended and pointed towards. So you'll see that within their cybersecurity framework, the CSF, the NIST CSF. All the controls will eventually go back down towards either the CIS controls or the 853 or COBIT or whatever, right? And we'll touch on that a little bit in a few seconds. So here it is. Switching slides again. Hopefully WebEx is playing kindly to you. But the NIST CSF program framework is a voluntary guidance that's based on, and make sure that you understand this, existing controls so that you can better manage your guidelines and your practices so that the reduction, in risk is shown. So it's not just saying there, here, use these things, you're good, done. What it's saying is you have to have controls in place for this program to work. You can't have a program without the controls, right? It's like you're having a vision of doing some work and doing something, but you actually don't do it, right? So you have to have that vision. Where do you want to be? And the controls kind of come afterwards. So they start first with the program, and they'll go backwards into the controls. Whereas the CIS ones we just did, we started with the controls and we moved into the program. I'm hoping that is kind of making a little more sense as we go through this. But the attributes of the program are in very, very good common accessible language. So as you're sitting there and you're looking at it, you're like, this just makes sense. You don't have to be super technical to get this. So it's written very well. It's all based on risk as we move forward, and it's very, very secular, as I'm saying. So as we see these 5 different functions, the NIST calls these functions in version 1.1. It starts at identify, right? So you have to always have a part to start with. You have to do identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Those are the 5 functions, the 5 fingers that make a fist, right? These are the areas that are very, very circular and cyclical, and they're constantly in motion. These aren't one thing you say, oh, I'm just doing identify today. That doesn't happen. You have to be doing all of these and how they intertwine each other to make yourself a good program. So identify is pretty much understanding what you got. What do you have? What assets do you have? Assets can be software, hardware, anything, right? Understand what an attacker might be looking to attack. Understand that, identify what they are, and record them. We talked about that with the CIS controls. Within the basic one we saw before on category 1 was hardware asset discovery. That was the first one, discover that. Those controls would be inside the identify function. Understand what you have. Protecting what you've just identified. So making sure that you have proactive monitoring in place. That is it. That is going to actually deny attacks. Protect them, which goes now back towards the detect. Now that you're protecting things, you have to detect that things are going on. That's more of the monitoring for incidents, making sure that you're seeing these things occur and that you can now respond to them, which brings you to the next function. When a breach happens, what do you do? How do you respond to something that's been detected that you've attempted to protect and you've already identified? You see how it's moving its way backwards. Once that has occurred, you get back to the recovery stage. So the recovery is getting back to par after a breach, right? So, and then once that happens, you're back again, identifying, protect, detect, respond, recover. This doesn't stop. Okay? This is a continuous phase. This is protecting the entire life cycle of attack and defense for your organization. And part of one of the webinars we'll be doing, the 103, is going to be about kill chains and how things and the attacker's mentality on what they're going to be, doing to pretty much doing recon, going out there, exfiltrating data, and how do we now use these frameworks, these programs to stop that and make sure that they don't win, right? So this is the CSF program framework. These are the functions. This is how it works. Cyclical, 5 functions. And as we move forward, we're going to get a little bit more in detail on these functions and these categories and these subcategories, just like we did with the CIS controls, breaking them down into further different compartments. Switching slides now, there are different components that are within the CSF. Okay, so this is actually from their site. They have a core, they have profiles, and they have implementation tiers. The core is literally the functions, the categories underneath those functions, and the subcategories underneath the categories. Everything in these frameworks and these programs work in a hierarchy. To make sure everyone is aware, it's all very hierarchical. So it's just coming down. So the functions that we said before, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, those are the 5. Underneath that, there are 21 categories separated between those 5. Underneath those 21 categories, there is subcategories of 108 separate subcategories. So as you go down a layer, they continually expand. Okay, that's the core, the desired outcome of your hierarchy that's aligned towards your guidance and your controls. That's what the core is. That's everything that's going on. Now, based off of that, you have profiles. So you have those 108 subcategories, which is pretty much when they're all expanded out in the bottom layer. Which ones are important to you? You have to develop a profile on yourself when you're doing this with the CSF. As we said, we can now mirror this back towards the CIS controls and their implementation groups, right? Making sure you identify where you're going to start focusing. What actually matters to you? How do you do this, right? What's your risk appetite? The resources you're using, so they have using there, the desired outcomes of the framework core. So based off of what you have, how and what you are currently, how are you going to use the core, the functions, the categories, the subcategories, built out and expanded? How are you going to use those? What is most important to you? That's what the program helps to go through. So you get that gap analysis done. You look through these functions. You make sure, hey, I'm good here or I'm great here, and you highlight and you focus and you massage and you keep on going down until you have a program, right? That's what the profiles are. So lastly, within their components, they have 3 components. They have their tiers. There are 4 tiers. This is the measurement of the organization based off common risk management practices and procedures and kind of where you fit, right? Helps you with profiling, which helps you get and use the core. Everything is hierarchical when you talk about these type of things, right? Everything builds upon something else. So within the tiers, in the CSF, within the documentation, which is all fully free and downloadable, you have 4 tiers that you can put yourself into to measure your practices. That is partial, that is also risk informed, that is repeatable, and that is adaptive. Those are the 4. So the 4 that you have, partial, means you have really nothing in place. You were literally just winging it, waiting for something to happen, and you're on the balls of your feet the entire time, just trying to figure it out as it comes. That's partial. Nothing really going on. Risk informed. You are paying attention, kind of, sort of. You have policies in place, but that's really it. So you kind of have verbal policies in place. If something was to happen, you're still kind of winging it, right? You might not have, so as an example, you know phishing is bad. You tell people don't to click on links. That's really it. Then you have the next tier, which is repeatable. And that is you have policies in place. You kind of have tools in place too, and you know how to use them. So you're starting to be able to do a repeatable process of those 5 functions of identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And you can kind of do things along those lines. You're sort of building out how far you can go. Adaptive is you have enough controls in place to deal with an attack in real time. You can isolate the attack, you can recover quickly, you can detect it, and you're working and you're going through the incident response type of phase. That's the adaptive one. So you have within those tiers, you have partial, risk, repeatable, and adaptive. So that's where we are. When we have that, we now go to our next slide. This is the program framework. This is it laid out. So I'm going to give a second there for it to kind of expand. All right, so that's the program framework, right? With the categories. So you can see in the top there, they have the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. That's the overarching, in control of everything. It's broken down into 5 categories, I should say functions, with it then broken down into 21 other functions below that, the subcategories as you see. So we have the framework, we have the functions of the 5, we have the 21 categories underneath that. And then from there, we now can start building the profile on yourself, accept that implementation group. Where do you fit from a tier perspective? Where do you want to go build your profile? And when we did the CIS ones, we started with the first one. So we're going to start here with identify, start with the first one, that first category, first function, go into the first category. What is it? How are you doing asset management? We've spoke about that. So here, how are you doing business environment? So if you get down there, how are you identifying your business environment? What are you doing? That might be something that is a risk to you. And you're like, you know what? That's an area that I need to have a lot more improvement on. I'm going to be building my program, my framework. We're not doing anything there, and it's a risk to our organization. So based off of my tier that I've just put myself in as a profile, that is an issue for me. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that and we're going to build off of it, right? So moving on to the next slide here, this is where the categories kind of expand, right? You have the subcategories. So with the NIST CSF, what we're doing is we're looking at the entire framework, as we said, those 5, the identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, which gets very easy to say after a while. And you take those categories and you're going through them and be like, yes, you know what, this is important to me. You know what, business environment, yes, that is an issue. I need to be able to go through that. So let me see where I am with that. Now you take that within the framework, they call that ID.be, as you see from the ID, and they go into the subcategories. Now this is where we start with the controls now, okay? We've identified that within the function, we are now moving ourselves from identify to the business environment category, and we are now looking through those subcategories saying, I am not good in ID, I keep saying ID, ID.be-1, right? The role of the supply chain. How are we doing that? What are we doing? That is an area that either we're not doing well or I want to get a little more information on. And this is where the CSF now goes out and guides you towards those informative references, okay? This one here happens not to have anything with CIS in it, but the other ones that we went through, they have the mapping towards those CIS controls based off of the categories and the functions, right? So they're great. So what you can do, you can actually go to the CIS site or the NIST CSF site, and you can download the guidance on how the NIST CSF ties directly from their program to the CIS controls. And then you can actually go back towards the CIS site and download their mapping from the CIS controls back up towards their framework, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. Personally, I find the CIS one a little bit more informative and clear on how to understand, but download both of them from either side, take a look at it, and get your feel for it. But what the framework here is doing, the program framework from the CSF is doing, is it's helping you identify the areas in those functions that you might need to look at, going over the categories, finding the subcategories, and then leading you to water with the informative resources. They are not going out there and saying, this is how you do it. They're pretty much saying, find these, find COVID-5, find the ISO, find the NIST 853. We mentioned that before. Find those, and then move forward. Then take them there, okay? So it's, as you say, it's a hierarchical way of going through things. As we have this in place, the programs always reference the controls, and the controls always run back up into the programs. Programs are overarching, always overarching, understandable. Controls are detailed and they're technical, and there's so much information in the NIST 853 which they're on revision 4. Actually, they're launching revision 5 shortly, but they don't have that in place. They just pretty much said, here, you go, that's where it is. And they actually, within that revision, they show you where to look. CP-2, SA-12 for IDBE-1 if you have information that you want for it. So they're pretty much saying, you've found exactly what you need. Now, here's the references and here's the bookmark in those controls to go find it. It's like you're pretty much doing like one of those choose your own adventure books, and like, I need to go here, and you're going next page, and suddenly you've led yourself on your own adventure towards the controls that need to be in place. And that's kind of what the framework is meant to do. The framework is meant to just guide you. So switching slides right now, we are going on to the slide that we kind of broke down a little bit here on mapping the NIST functions towards the CIS controls, towards CCSI, that's us, on how we now make managed services for those. So everything that we do, we do because we're trying to build out an MSSP that is focused on the controls and the frameworks that are in place today. So we can go out there and build all these cool tools, but at the end of the day, if no one is going to use them, there's no purpose for it. So we rely on making sure that what we're offering is, one, going to be helpful and productive to our clients. It's going to be continuous, and it's going to fulfill one of these functions within the NIST framework that somehow normally maps towards CIS, because that's what everybody's using. All the regulations, you look at all the regulations, you look at HIPAA, you look at NYDFS, look at all these PCI ones, they're all based off of some type of NIST or CIS standard. So if you're doing these already, those regulations kind of fall in line. So what we're doing as a company, and we have been, is that we are now going out there and we have now built all of our security managed services based off of these frameworks, based off of these programs. So for Identify, we do vulnerability management, we do the risk assessments, we do the penetration test, the third-party supply chain review. That's how we fulfill for our clients those areas for the Identify function. With Protect, we do security awareness training, we do data loss prevention services, and we have any type of managed firewall, endpoint, IPS, DDoS. Those things are there. We're managing, and as well as endpoint, we're managing these things and we're protecting automatically, and we're 24/7 looking at it. Now, the detect part of it, we are SOC 2 Type 2. We are wrapping our services around that log management, network traffic analysis. We have the guys in there from the response standpoint to do any analysis within our SOC, to do any containment and eradication, and to make sure we have automated alerting all the time. We're responding and we're there. When we have to, we come back and we recover. We have business as a backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service. We have business continuity planning that we go through it. We go through this with all of our clients right now, and we're working with that. And big part of recovery that we've seen is tabletops. We go through the tabletops with our clients. They want to understand how to live out an event, an incident, a disaster, and how they would plan for it. So we go through that and we work that out. And we kind of just make sure that we follow the NIST functions and the controls afterwards. So we're mapping our security services towards these particular programs and frameworks because we know, one, they work, and two, our clients are doing it. So it's an easier way for us to really speak the same language, to really move the same way, and it's been extremely helpful. And if you have any questions on any of these things, anything with NIST, anything with CIS, anything with our CCSI Threat Protect services, shoot us a chat, send me an email. I will personally respond to everything on here. We will get our engineers in line, whatever you have. Switching now towards one of our last slides that we have here. We're coming up on time. This is what we call our security wheel. So every one of these services, everything that we just spoke about with those NIST and those CIS frameworks and programs, they are developed there and they work in tandem with each other. We saw the NIST CSF had their own wheel. We have this as a gear because each part of this, each tooth to this thing, as it moves, pretty much touches the other, and they work in tandem and they work well. It's kind of how we're really just going through how we do security here. We take it at a layered approach. Everything feeds directly into our SOC, and then from there, we just kind of mitigate, move forward, we identify, and we just keep on going. That is kind of what we have. That is our presentation for today. I think we might have some questions. I'm going to take a quick look. But from the webinar, we have the next one that's going to be in a few weeks. It's going to be the 102. It's going to be on the ISO 27001 and a little bit more in detail with NIST CSF. So feel free to come back for that. That's going to be on May 6th. Then we'll have another one shortly after that one, which is going to be based off of like MITRE and kill chain and stuff. It's going to be a different type of framework, but still in the world of frameworks. So with that being said, I'm going to take a quick look here at some of the questions. One sec. Okay, we have one here that says, do you see one area of the controls harder to adhere than others? So it really comes down to how you're utilizing the controls and the culture of your company. It depends. Anything that has to do with people normally is a little bit harder. I'm just to be bluntly honest. You can make changes to machines all day long. They just work. They do what they're told. When you're dealing with the organizational side of things, when you're dealing with the people side of things, it very much becomes a little bit more difficult, especially when you have buy-in, working with the board, doing that type of thing. So those are the areas that we see that usually are a little bit harder to deal with because it's just that much more difficult. It's just that there's personalities involved. There might be conflicting resources. There might be strategy going back and forth from different business units. So it really depends on where you come from that side of things. So yeah, that's kind of my answer on that one. Is they're all relatively easy to do, but it's how do you have them implemented, and then what are the personalities and the culture and the priorities over them. And we have one more left here. When would you use NIST over CIS? Well, you really wouldn't. So it really depends on your organization. So if you have controls in place already that you might have, great, use the CIS controls. Go out there. My personal opinion for right now is to use the CIS controls and then map towards the program of the NIST CSF. So the NIST CSF is a great program. That's kind of where they started. And then CIS kind of started with the controls. Use the best of both worlds. Go out there. I said before, go out there, download the CIS mapping of their controls to the NIST CSF framework. It's fantastic. It's very easy to understand. And you get a very good understanding of the best of both worlds of the NIST CSF program, how they do those 5 functions, and then the 20 controls of CIS, and then the subcategories below it. That would be my personal opinion. I'd have to mix and match things if you're going to use these two in some way. But yeah, that's kind of how we have it. But other than that, guys, I want to thank you for everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you May 6th. See ya.